So I've lost 10 kilograms. I was like, what? What's going on? To me, it was like almost miraculous. My blood sugar levels are now well within the non-diabetic range. My weight went down, body fat percentage went down, and I wasn't as hungry as I used to be. And how do I do that? I use Hava to do that. It's a lot easier.
Peter Hanlon struggled with excess weight and type 2 diabetes for a long time. He tried all kinds of approaches like low-carb and keto, intermittent fasting, and he did have some good results. But then he found something that was even more effective and a lot easier to do. Welcome, Peter. Thank you for joining.
Pleasure. Thank you, Andreas.
You've been on the health journey. Would you want to share your story from the beginning?
Sure. So about 10 years ago, I was working in a sort of corporate organization, and I was particularly unhealthy. At that time, I was diagnosed with mild heart disease, and I weighed just under 100 kilograms, or it could have been slightly over 100, but I think I stopped weighing myself at about 98 kilograms. I was too embarrassed to look anymore. And my father actually died, and I was looking after him in the last few months of last year or so of his life. He had dementia, and it was particularly stressful, as you can imagine. So my wife and I decided to, rather than go on an overseas holiday, which we'd planned, I went to a wellness retreat. And in many ways, that was the start of my journey, because I learned there, particularly the focus there was about sugar and processed foods, but they were probably high carb as well, I should point out. So they, in this day and age, you wouldn't regard them as being perfect. But at the time, I certainly reduced sugar and reduced highly processed foods.
When was this? How long ago?
2014, 10 years ago.
I see.
Yeah. And so over that time, I've progressed from that sort of, reduction in sugar, reduction in processed foods. And in fact, I then also started to listen to some podcasts. The first one I ever came across was the Two Keto Dudes one. Two guys out of one was Australian and one out of the US. So I started listening to that, and fairly soon after that, actually, I got onto Diet Doctor. And for me, that was, I don't know if it was 8 or 9 years ago, but certainly quite some time ago that I got onto Diet Doctor, and I got quite, obsessive in my use of Diet Doctor. In fact, I became that obsessive that all of my friends and family used to refer to me as the keto policeman, because I became a bit annoying.
For any listeners who wasn't paying attention to that particular thing at that time, that's the low carb website and app that me and our team set up back in the days.
Yeah, and it was a great resource for me. And I'm the cook in the family, and so I would plan all the meals around Diet Doctor, and I had a lot of fun doing that. The interesting thing was that around about a couple of years into that journey, so now we're talking 7 or 8 years ago, I was diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. Prior to that, my blood sugar levels were at the high end of the non-diabetic range, but hadn't moved for quite some time. And the strange thing for me was that even though I was losing weight, reduction in sugar, reduction in processed foods, using Diet Doctor recipes, the strange thing for me was that my blood sugar was getting worse, not better. And so that was a real concern for me. So I started digging into it a bit more. And I went to an endocrinologist at the time who wasn't particularly good, I didn't think. He basically said, oh, look, you've been able to stave off type 2 diabetes for quite some time, but it's just catching up with you, and you sort of have to just live with it. So I was put on the basic diabetic medication of metformin, but then I kept on looking for different resources, and I won't go through all of them, but I started looking at a whole range of different resources in terms of what I could do to actually improve my diabetic situation, and also that underlying relatively mild heart disease that I had as well. So primarily in those days, the main focus for me was weight loss. As I mentioned, I was about 98 plus kilograms. I'm sure I got over 100, but I just didn't measure it at the time. And through all of those mechanisms, I got down to about 85 kilograms. I was moderately active. I wasn't sort of really focused on fitness at that time. I was moderately active, I'd say, but I still wanted to do more. And I started there's an Australian, Marty Kendall, who has a website and a process called data-driven fasting. And I jumped onto data-driven fasting.
Yeah, I know him. I know him quite well. He's a good guy. Talk to him regularly.
Yeah, and that was good for me because the process is about not eating until your blood sugar goes down to a particular level. So that was great for me. What I found at that time was that I kept on losing weight, which was great. But again, I was still only moderately active. And as I dug in further into the issue to do with type 2 diabetes, I realized that I needed to increase my muscle mass and in particular, increase any fat in my pancreas, quite specifically. And so what I started doing then was a lot more exercise. I was doing some sprinting, riding my push bike. I started lifting weights. All that was great, except it just made me really hungry. So I was eating a lot more, and my weight started to increase because I was just eating a lot. And I also found that, particularly when I was out on my bike or something, and I didn't take any food with me, and there weren't exactly the right foods that I could find in shops on the way. And so I was occasionally, I'm not, in terms of low carb and keto, I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So, I'd make some poor choices and I'd end up eating too much. So I just found that I was, putting on weight again, even though actually my blood sugar was reducing. And so I wasn't that worried about it.
Maybe you put on some lean mass if you're doing all this weightlifting and exercising.
Yeah.
So adding weight in the form of muscle mass potentially. I mean, that's probably just a good thing, right?
My body fat percentage was going down, to your point about putting on lean mass, but I probably wasn't as educated as I am now about it. So I still thought that the basic thing was if you have diabetes, you must be overweight, and so I was trying to get down and using BMI as a measure and things like that.
Yeah. BMI, of course, is it's not perfect. And I think losing excess, I mean, you know this probably as well as anybody by now, losing excess body fat in type 2 diabetes is fantastic. That's the main thing. But when it comes to lean mass or muscle mass, probably just better to have more.
Yeah, exactly. And probably it was only I think 2 or 3 years ago, probably I came across Ted Naiman's work and the PE diet. And so I started to focus a bit more on protein and realizing that, I could definitely start to lift. And I think what was happening during that time as well, even though I was putting on lean mass, I think my protein levels were quite low. I'm eating lots of vegetables and some fruit and stuff like that, but I don't think I was eating anywhere near the amount of protein. I wasn't measuring it in those days.
Do you have any idea about how much you may have been eating? I know probably most people do not really track that kind of thing, but do you have any guess?
Yeah, I think, using the Hava app now, my recommended protein is about 130 grams a day. I suspect I was probably eating 60 to 70 grams of protein.
Wow. Yeah, and for context, the 130, the recommendation in the Hava app is our minimum recommendation.
Yeah,
exactly. It's
absolutely
fine, maybe even better to go higher, but the recommendation is to get at least that much every day.
That's right. Yeah, so I was probably eating half of the minimum requirement, and I was getting tired, and I was certainly not putting on as much muscle mass as I would have liked to have put on, and the blood sugar was still lower than it had been, but it was still stubbornly high as far as I was concerned. So I knew that there was more I had to do about it. And even though, as I mentioned earlier, with all of the exercise I was doing, I was eating more and putting on lean muscle mass, I know looking back that I wasn't eating as well as I should have been or as well as I could have been. So I was continually looking forward to other ways that I could improve that situation. And then, of course, out of the blue, and I think it was on Twitter or somewhere like that, or I might have got an email, was that Hava was introduced. And actually, I should go back. So data-driven fasting that Marty Kendall does is really easy because it's just about fasting. So that's great. I'm quite busy and, I'm fairly time poor. And so even though I'm sort of the cook in the house, I often didn't have time to prepare meals properly. And so it was great to have resources like Diet Doctor and the recipes in Ted Naiman's book and all those sorts of things. But I just didn't always have the time to do these things. Time was a big problem for me in terms of eating right and preparing the right food and those sorts of things. So I just knew that there was more I needed to do. And when the first messages came out about Hava, it just sounded like too good to be true, to be perfectly honest. It was like, what, you can just sort of type in a few things or maybe even take a photo and that'll tell you what you're eating and you can do the breakdown of the nutritional information. So I was very, very excited about the opportunity that Hava presented. And, I've been very, very happy with it. I don't use it every day. I don't use it for every meal. It's the way I use, and I know some people do from looking at, chat rooms and things like that. But to me, it's a guide of things. I tend to generally eat, over a week, I'd probably eat generally the same thing over a week. And so there are certain meals that I know are great. I use it a lot when I'm out. If I'm eating out somewhere, if I'm on holidays, if I'm traveling, that's when I use it a lot. And when I am traveling, it's really good for me to understand how much protein I'm eating or not, as the case may be. I was in Italy earlier this year, and because of my keto and low carb sort of world, I wouldn't normally eat pasta and pizza, but I thought, hey, I'm in Italy, so I'm going to try some, and it was great. I really loved it.
It's almost required when you're in Italy, right?
That's what I thought. I think it is compulsory, but interestingly, my weight didn't. I mean, I was doing a lot of walking. We were holidaying and that sort of things, but my weight didn't go up, and neither did my blood sugar. So, I tested on the road and all those sorts of things. So I was quite surprised that, and, I've had some Italian friends in Australia who sort of point out, well, it's the quality of the pasta in Italy compared to the manufactured pasta in Australia. So who knows? It might be something to do with that.
Yeah. I mean, Italian traditional food is, it's really real food, not very processed.
Yeah.
I think if people ate like that, we might not have so much diabetes and obesity problems compared to a standard American diet.
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly obesity rates in Italy were low traditionally. Now they're going up like everywhere, but yeah.
And unfortunately in Australia, we're catching up to the US situation. I think if there is such a thing as a standard Australian diet, it's probably following, not exactly, but following the standard American diet, and our rates of overweight and obesity and diabetes and things like that is not as high as the US, but we're unfortunately getting up there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same in the whole world. I'm in Sweden. We're certainly far behind the US, but we're working hard to get towards that. Processed foods are spreading, ultra-processed foods spreading all around the world because they're profitable. I think it's just foregone conclusion what's going to happen unless people decide to take a different path. The foods that people are going to want to sell us is food that is profitable.
Yeah,
and
of course.
And the most profitable food is the food that make you eat the most, because then you buy the most. It's just that's what market forces drive. So if we don't make any conscious choices to eat otherwise, we'll get on Ozempic medications, then obesity rates will keep going up. But anyways, back to you. So you got on, tried this Hava thing. You've been following TED and upping your protein. So what kind of effect has this had for you, your health, your how you feel, blood sugar levels, weight, etc.? How's it been?
Quite significant. I was before Hava, I was sort of fluctuating between 82 and 85 kilograms. And as I mentioned, I'd started to sort of significantly lift the amount of exercise I was doing, which made me hungrier. Mostly, I was eating okay, but sometimes not. When I started using Hava, what came out of that was that I was eating to the sort of the standards within Hava. I was lifting the protein and trying to get up around that midpoint, 45 and above in the satiety score. To me, it was almost miraculous without getting sort of too hubristic about it. But my weight went down, my body fat percentage went down, and I wasn't as hungry as I used to be, even though I was doing probably even more exercise, because I think I was just more energetic. And so I was lifting the amount of exercise I was doing. Everything was going in the right direction, and yet I wasn't as hungry as I used to be. So to some degree, I was just like, exactly. Yeah, I was like, what's going on? And now I'm about 73, 74 kilograms. So I've lost 10 kilograms.
Oh, wow. That's a significant, because this isn't so long either. It's only been, half a year or a bit more?
Probably 9 months, I think it is, something like that. Yeah. And my body fat percentage has gone down. So it's now at like 17.5% or something like that, which,
that's nice.
I'm a couple of months from 70, being 70. So, if you look at the sort of normal body fat percentage for somebody who's 70, it's a lot higher than 17 or 18%.
You went from being quite a significant lower weight on type 2 diabetes to better than most people.
Yeah, well, my wife does call me obsessive about these sorts of things, which I probably am. And well, I have been for 10 years. I wasn't obsessive for the previous 50 years. So, I'm taking my health more seriously. My blood sugar levels are now well within the non-diabetic range.
Wow.
As I mentioned, I got diagnosed with mild heart disease 10 years ago. And, I've had an MRI recently, and a couple of weeks ago I had my the treadmill test where you run on the treadmill, and then they do the echocardiogram, where they do an echocardiogram of you just as you jump off the treadmill, and a few other cardiac tests. And I keep on having this thing where the cardiologist says to me, "Well, you can come back next year if you want, but why don't you just come back in 2 years?" So he's obviously
that's what you want to hear, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there are many, many sort of things I could describe, but I think it's this issue of eating as much as you want, using the Hava approach, eating the right things, but just not feeling hungry. So, I've gone through, and I haven't gone through everything that I've done over the years, but I've tried all sorts of things of extended fasting and 3-day fasts, and sort of elimination diets and all of those things. But with all of those things, what I found was that I was going up and down. I was going on them, I was going off them. The weight was going up, the weight was going down. The blood sugar was going up, the blood sugar was going down. So I just found it hard to find consistency. And certainly in the last 9 months, it hasn't been 5 years, but certainly in the last 9 months, it's been very consistent. That weight has come down. I'm happy where I am now, about 73, 74 kilograms. BMI is not a perfect measure, but I can't remember what I am now, 22 and a half or something on BMI, which sounds pretty good. I'm just
you're right in the middle of normal.
Yeah, and I'm 181 centimeters, so not as tall as you, I believe, but still sort of
202 centimeters.
Yeah,
many people. That's.
I'm happy to only be 181, by the way. I don't want to bump into the top of the doorway. But no, I feel good.
I mean, that's amazing. The results are stellar, right? Most people with diabetes would give a lot to have results like that. Compared to what you've been doing before, do you find that, you get better results, but is this harder than what you did before, or the same or easier? How do you, in general, what do you feel?
Oh, it's a lot easier, I've been through the process of, weighing all of my food before I cook it, and, just trying to get the macros right. And, and that's just a pain in the neck. I mean, that's for me anyway, that to do that type of thing is really difficult. Fasting, I'm pretty good at. I intermittent fast these days. So most days I wouldn't eat until after midday sometime, and sometimes it might not be until 4 or 5 o'clock. Not because in the past where I was trying to do it, I'm just not hungry as much as I used to be. So if I'm not hungry, I just won't bother eating. So I think Hava gives me clearer information and easier information to assess. So I could theoretically do the same thing as Hava by weighing all my food and keeping it all separated into the macros and things like that, which, as I said, is time consuming and for me is a pain in the neck. And particularly, as I said, I work in the film industry, so sometimes I'm on film shoots, and I'm not going to take scales away with me and measure every bit of food. And of course, sometimes it's food that's presented to me, so it's not stuff that I've prepared. And what Hava gives me, both initially, through typing it in, but now particularly with the improved photo tracking, every unusual, or I shouldn't say unusual, but every meal that I'm not used to, I'll use Hava to see what's in it.
So you just take a picture?
Yeah, I just take a picture.
And how does that help you? Can you describe it for people who don't know?
Yeah, generally what it's telling me, and obviously it tells us lots of things, but it'll tell me, are there too many carbs in this meal? So that's the first thing. I sort of know that anyway, so that's helpful, but it's not perfect for me. But the critical issue, and I think the game changer for me, is it talks about the protein, how much protein I'm eating. And as I said before, I was probably eating a half or slightly above half of the minimum recommended through Hava. So what it does now is if my first meal of the day, I'm ending up eating sort of like 30 grams of protein, and particularly if I'm only eating 2 meals a day, that'll say to me, well, I better up the protein for the rest of the day. So sometimes I might have a protein shake, or there's a couple of good protein bars in Australia that haven't got too much rubbish in them, and that, they're sort of low carb and all that sort of thing. I mean, I'll use those if I have to, but generally I won't. But it just means that, I might sit down and I might be somewhere and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, I'm really low on the protein.
Yeah, absolutely. Very convenient, obviously. So yeah, there's that. I mean, as long as it works, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then so I might get to the end of the day and go, okay, I'm pretty low on protein, so I'll order a great big steak or something like that. Or in fact, a few weeks ago, I had a fairly large steak, and it wasn't on the menu, but they had some grilled prawns or shrimp, depending on who you're talking to, on the menu. So I said, can I get some of those as well? And they said, we don't do them. And I said, well, just put the 2 meals together. So I ended up having a steak, and then on top of it, I had the second meal, which was some grilled prawns or shrimp.
That's a lot of protein. I mean, just to be clear for the listener, obviously you can do this high protein approach whether you eat steak or not. You can do it in a plant-based way as well.
Sure.
But yeah, this is definitely a popular way to do it. So
it's interesting you should mention the plant-based approach, because I would probably classify myself as not a carnivore, but I'm definitely an omnivore, but certainly at the carnivore end of omnivore. I've started eating a lot more plant-based protein with Hava.
That's interesting. What do you eat? What do you like? Is there anything you like?
Yeah, I've always liked tofu, but on occasions, just on occasions, right?
Not everybody loves that.
So I've had that,
that's good.
labneh and some legumes. So I think it's just been it's shifted me in that way. I think the other thing that feeds into the measure as well, which has changed my eating, is a lot more fiber as well. So, definitely having a lot more fiber, mainly through vegetables and things. I mean, I've always eaten vegetables, but certainly lifting up the vegetables with fiber as well. The other one that I stopped doing, so during my sort of really hardcore keto days, the only fruit that I would eat would be some berries, berries with some Greek yogurt, and that would be as far as I'd go. I've gone back to eating some more fruit now, which interestingly has not made my blood sugar go worse.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty interesting. I mean, I had similar experiences in a way as you. I maybe have started even earlier by a decade or so, but eating low carb keto for long time, good results. But I think taking this approach, the results are at least as good. I mean, actually, I recently had to pull back a bit and do slightly lower satiety foods, because it got too effective. Like, if you don't want to be too lean. It sounds like a silly problem in this day and age, but when you're 202 centimeters, you don't want to be super lean. It's not the greatest. I don't feel my best there. I want to feel strong. So yeah, it's a nice problem to have when, like you said, it's easier to do than what you used to do. I mean, that's certainly what I feel compared to going close to keto or very low carb. This is 10 times easier. And then when I get results that are at least as good or maybe better, that's interesting. Like, I think this is very, very interesting and very promising hopefully for a lot of people who might benefit. Or what would you say?
Well, I think I'll just start with the opposite to begin with. So I do know a couple of people who are highly obsessive sort of keto. I don't call them fanatics, because I'm probably used to be one, but have got the time and the patience and the wherewithal to basically measure every single thing they eat. And so, they would cut everything up, they would weigh it, they would carefully add them in, and that sort of, and to me, that's like, I don't have the time to do that. I don't have the inclination to do that. And I'm not saying that Hava is the lazy person's keto. It's not, but it does make it easier. If you're time poor, if you're a busy person, if you've got a family, et cetera, you're not going to be cutting up and measuring every single thing you eat every meal, particularly if, like me, for one reason or another, you travel a lot. I live in a country area, and a lot of my work is in Adelaide, the city. So I live an hour and a half away. So, often I'm up there for a meal, and I just don't have I'm not going to carry scales around with me and measure everything. So I think the first thing I'd say is, it is just an easier and more convenient way of tracking your food. It's as simple as that. It's just an easier and more convenient way of doing it. Not everything about it is perfect. I mean, I would probably say one out of every 3 times I adjust the food in the photo track,
Absolutely.
which is fine. But that takes 2 minutes. So what?
I mean, I have the same experience exactly. It's still faster than starting from scratch, even
Absolutely.
when you have to adjust.
Yeah.
And I can also tell you that we have an update to the AI model that should be coming soon. But I think that the big picture thing is this kind of AI tracking of food was impossible at this level. At this level of accuracy was impossible a year ago, and now it's become very possible. But the really exciting thing to me is when this kind of thing happens with technology, it's usually just the first step, which means that right now it's kind of good. It's kind of like an average human, I would say, at judging food content from a photo on average. Sometimes it's surprisingly good. Sometimes it makes silly mistakes. But I think that very soon it's going to be like an expert human, which means that only the best humans will be able to match it. And then not so long after that, it's going to be superhuman, which means it's going to be better at estimating ingredients and amounts from a photo than any living human has ever been.
Exactly.
It seems just absolutely obvious because it's being trained on so much data that it would be like a human who do nothing but estimating food content from food photography all day, every day for 100
That's
lifetimes.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a highly useful tool now. I think, like you say, but it will rapidly improve from here and become.
Well, and I mean, I've
better.
seen it improve just in the relatively short time it's been out. So from the first version to where we are today, it's demonstrably better than it was on day one. So
100%.
yeah, you're right.
So much work going into it, you wouldn't believe. Got to be a bit obsessive about these things, but it's fun.
Yeah. Sometimes obsessiveness is good.
Yeah, for people who are in a similar situation as you've been, struggling with their weight. A lot of people do that. Obviously, struggling perhaps with their blood sugar, maybe having a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, maybe even beginnings of heart disease. What do you wish you'd known when you started out? What kind of advice would you give to someone who's a bit more fresh to this than you are?
Well, of course, the bigger issue, which is obviously well known in the low carb and keto and sort of natural food world, is that just because of my age, I grew up in the low fat era. So I grew up in that era where fat was demonized, and red meat and all that sort of lean protein was demonized. So when you say what do I wish was different, I mean, I wish I'd skipped that period because. I just recall of it was so much better to eat pasta every night and whole grain bread and whole grains. And I even remember when I went to this wellness place that I went to years ago, they were really getting focused on rice bran oil as being the healthy alternative. So you don't want to use butter, you don't want to use olive oil, you want to use all of these sort of seed oils. And I remember coming back from these things and sort of telling some of my friends, you should stop using that butter. You should use these seed oils. It's much better for you. No, completely wrong. So there's all of that. I mean, my general advice would be everyone has to find a method that works for them. And as I said, I got value out of, weighing every bit of food I ate to understand the macros and all that sort of thing. But it was impractical for someone who's quite busy. And I think most people, either it's impractical so they don't have time, or it's impractical because they can't be bothered to go through that process all the time. So I think it's important to look around and find a method or methods that work for you. I know, I don't do it every cycle, but I still use the Marty Kendall's data-driven fasting every now and again. When I feel I might be slipping backwards a little bit, or I need to, I'll jump in and do one of his 30-day challenges. Sometimes I just do it just to keep myself honest. So I think that's a technique that works for me to try a couple of things at the same time. It's unfortunately too late. It was too late for me, if you like, because I did develop some of those conditions. But the last 10 years has been a journey of discovery for me. And it's been quite an enjoyable discovery, and I've made some mistakes along the way, and I've found some things that have been helpful for me, but were too hard for me to do. But for me now, I think particularly with Hava, I've sort of got something that is both very useful today, but the great thing, going back to what you were saying earlier, is it's something that's developing all the time. So I find it easy to use now. I find it instructive to use. It helps me a lot. And next week or the week after or the month after or the year after, it's going to be better still. Yeah, I'm stuck with it for life.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, definitely. We have a lot of exciting improvements coming up. I think it's extremely early. We have some basic functionality that other apps have that we're going to add quite soon. But more excitingly than that, these possibilities opening up with AI now are super fascinating. I think every nutrition app is going to be obsolete pretty soon. Every existing nutrition app, everybody has to use this new technology because it's just going to make it so much better. The image tracking is one thing. That's amazing. But I think just basically having a coach with you at all times.
Yeah.
Like only the super rich could afford anything even close to it. You have a personal nutrition coach that's devoted to you 24/7. That's almost nobody has that, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can afford that. But now it's becoming affordable for everybody, potentially even free. We have a free version of Hava, and we have Ava inside this AI nutrition coach, which is really just a very, very, very early thing, what we're working on to integrate it throughout the app and just guide people. For people who are just beginning, I think it's going to be a complete game changer.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's I think everyone can get something slightly different out of it because everyone comes from a certain baseline, if you like. And particularly if I think of myself of being a couple of months away from being 70, one of the things that we know as people get older is that they lose muscle. And the other thing that happens is that older people tend to eat less protein as well. So you're losing muscle naturally as you age and you're less active probably. I'm not less active. I'm very active these days, but I've not done it hopefully forever. But certainly most people my age and obviously above will eat a lot less protein than they need. So that combination of aging, the natural things that come with aging, less mobility, less exercise, and less protein is why people go from the older age to the frail age sort of period of their life a lot faster. And I think for me, as I'm about to turn 70, it's quite important that I keep up the protein levels. And how do I do that? I use Hava to do that.
That's amazing advice, I think, for people in a similar situation. I would completely agree. I think a lot of people could feel better and stronger much further up in age than they currently do now.
Exactly.
Be much stronger, leaner, and healthier. Stave off things like dementia, things like heart disease and cancer could potentially be pushed, until later.
Well, my family history is it's riddled with dementia and heart disease and diabetes, and so even though interestingly on both of my parents who've since passed away, but both of their sort of siblings, everybody lived to quite an old age, mostly in their late 80s, early 90s, but they all had heart disease and they all had dementia, and probably half of them had diabetes. So they were sort of lucky in us that they got all those diseases that are often connected with aging, but they didn't die from them. They died much later on. And, they lived to what is certainly in Australia, a sort of a longer life than the average. But, so for me, it's like good. Hopefully I've got good genes, but I'm also familiarly prone to some of those diseases as well. So I've got to do an extra effort to make sure that I don't get sort of buckled down with those types of things as well.
Oh, well, I think you're making a tremendous change to your potential health in your later years. I mean, we know that metabolic syndrome, and especially type 2 diabetes, really accelerates dementia, Alzheimer, etc.
Exactly.
by a lot. So now that you have your blood sugar levels being normal, things being normal, I think your risk of encountering that sort of thing early in your later years would be much lower. I think that could benefit so many. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. What one thing would you recommend people to do if they want to start their journey towards a better health further into their lives?
It's a big question for one thing. I would recommend people do what I did, which is to do, take some time to do some research into, what's available. I think, if you become curious about your own health, then that's the start of the journey. If you're incurious about your health, if you're not curious about your health, then you won't look at ways to improve it. So I think it has to start with that curiosity about your health. And then when you do that, going on to the two rather than one, but when you do that, you'll start to work out what are the tools and applications that can help you get there. And obviously for me, I've, tried probably all of the ones that have been around in the low carb and keto world and, improving nutrition. But, where I've landed now with Hava is because of that development process you have with Hava, it means I'll keep on developing, but just by sticking with the same way of doing something.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you, Andreas. And thanks for all the work you and your team do. It's great.